Wow, The Last of Us is such a realistic and immersive game and wait, what? Um, wait, he can see through walls? Well, I guess not everything's perfect. What's up everybody, my name is AAA and today we're going to be talking about The Last of Us, and this is a game that I am in love with and can't wait to talk about. But first I'm going to say, go ahead and subscribe and check out my previous video which talks about Shadow of the Colossus and why that might be the greatest game of all time. And now in today's Game Off video, I'm going to be analyzing Naughty Dog's masterpiece in order to try and figure out whether or not it can best wander and aggro and take the crown of the greatest game of all time. As the series progresses, I'll introduce new challengers and give arguments for why they're up for consideration, and if the series gains traction, I'll start putting up polls to see which game you guys think should be on top. All that said, let's get into today's contestant. The Last of Us was released in 2013 to widespread critical acclaim, and upon hearing the praise it was getting, I went ahead and bought it in 2015 when I'd finally saved enough for a PS3, and I absolutely loved it. Since 2015, I've played the original and remastered versions of the game a total of 7 times to date. To put that in perspective, Assassin's Creed Black Flag has been sitting in my basement for a year, gathering dust, and I've played it none times. Which, granted, I'm ashamed about, but it also shows just how enamored I am with this game. Despite that, however, I'm trying to look at this game more objectively and remove at least some amount of personal bias from this analysis. Let's start everything off with story, and while the game has a ton of strengths that people mention while praising it, the number one thing most people touch upon is story, story, story. It's definitely one of the more memorable ones of the past few years, and some may argue of all time. To give a quick, spoiler-free explanation of the plot, The Last of Us takes place in a post-apocalyptic America that has been overrun by quote-unquote zombies, and we follow a man named Joel and his partner Tess, two smugglers who are hardened survivors that can take sketchy jobs if it means living to fight another day. They run across a girl named Marlene, who is the leader of the Fireflies, a rebel group that's pretty upset with how the government is handling this whole zombie thing, and is trying to fight it in their own way. Marlene promises a heap of guns and supplies if they complete a job for her, and it's revealed that the job is to smuggle a 14-year-old girl named Ellie to Boston, to meet up with a group of Fireflies there. While Joel is reluctant at first, Tess manages to convince him, and they set off to Boston. It's quickly revealed to us why this girl is important, and the reason being she's immune to the virus, and the Fireflies hope to use that to their advantage somehow. And this is the plot throughout most of the rest of the game. After such a heavy dosage of story and setup, a good 10 plus hours is trying to get Ellie where she needs to go, and sometimes realizing the Fireflies have moved, and so they have to change course a bit. Closer to the end, it picks up once again in terms of plot changes, and the ending is actually arguably one of gaming's all-time greats. While it may sound like the middle of the game is barren, that couldn't be farther from the truth. While the ultimate goal of the game isn't necessarily changing up a huge ton, that's not the point of the game, nor is that where the strength in the story comes. In fact, looking at the plot alone, it's not incredibly outside the box or earth-shattering, but the story is more about the characters and their relationship rather than the plot itself. People have likened it to Cormac McCarthy's novel The Road, in that both the novel and this game are not about the road and where it is leading, but is rather about the people walking on that road. On your adventure with Joel and Ellie, you'll meet up with other people, each different and each memorable, and in those encounters, while they only last for maybe a fifth of the game each one is set to the brim with heavy emotions and wonderful storytelling that is absolutely engrossing to watch. I found myself forgetting on many occasions, regardless of if it was my first, second, or seventh playthrough, that I was still moving forward to smuggle Ellie to the Fireflies. I got so caught up in the people and the relationships. Every pit stop and every moment where we had to move on seemed meaningful and essential, and I almost forgot that they were even going anywhere. The beginning and the end of the game do an amazing job of introducing and ending this epic journey that we've been on, and they're absolutely fantastic parts of the game. And while the middle seems to do that video game thing where it seems to allow overarching plot to take a backseat in order to pad the hours that the game lasts, The Last of Us somehow manages to make it its own unique storytelling experience that connects the two ends wonderfully, and instead of feeling bogged down and slow, it feels exciting and refreshing to have it be so essential and so different at the same time. Talking about the story without mentioning the characters would be pretty silly for any game, but to do it with this one would be utterly ridiculous. Joel is not a stereotypical hero, he makes shady choices and most of them benefit himself rather than the world as a whole, and yet Naughty Dog creates a backstory that immediately makes us sympathize for him, and even cry on his behalf in the first 20 minutes, and reaches a great balance between desperate man trying to survive and someone who was once a very good person, letting that part of him shine through at times, while not making those moments seem unfaithful to his character. He's not a hero, and we can see that in the torture scenes and the examples of cold-blooded murder, but he is adored by fans nonetheless. Ellie is a younger character done right in a video game. She is young enough to portray innocence and hope, the latter being a massive theme in the game overall, but is also old enough to hold her own and not act like a whiny child. She is at times a badass, and at times a frightened child hoping to survive, and her character fits in great with that of Joel's, sometimes matching his anger and strictness with sass and sarcasm, while other times showing vulnerability to open up his heart and bring out his desire to protect her. Aside from the two main characters, some other key players are Marlene, who is a
strong black woman, I don't need no man.
but done right and not overbearing. Sometimes trying to have strong females in position of power makes the creators portray her as an unparalleled badass who can handle everything better than a man, but Naughty Dog does a great job at making her seem strong and capable, while also making her just as vulnerable as the rest of the characters, male or female. Tess is another great addition, and her hard work, no-play attitude pairs with Joel really nicely, while also seeming like a necessary individual and not just a plot device. Bill has a unique relationship with Joel and may come off as irritating and abrasive, but by the time you move on from his location, you're left wondering if maybe you had him all wrong that whole time. Sam and Henry are great companions that show a lot of similarities to Joel and Ellie, with a few key differences here and there. Without going too in detail of how they are and what ultimately happens, the two of them can be seen almost as alternate versions of the two main characters, and how things might have turned out very differently for the two of them if they had made the same choices as Henry and Sam. Tom offers a safe haven and a nice change of pace for a bit, which really helps with the pacing of the game and makes use of the up and down time, and by the end him and his village represent a very important theme of the game. Finally, David has a great character arc that makes the winter chapter thrilling and disturbing, despite being one of the shortest of the bunch. There are a lot of potential spoilers with this character though, so I'll just leave it at that for now. Overall, the plot and characters combine to create an unforgettable experience, and definitely puts the game in the upper echelon of story. A quick look at immersion, and although some things can be a little bit eyebrow-raising, like Joel's way too good ability to hear people and pinpoint exactly where they are, things breaking too easily, always using breakable shivs when knives seem readily available pretty often, and a few others. Those are mainly just ways to improve the gameplay and make it more challenging, or maybe a little easier, in order to balance some things out, and so in that category it's pretty much forgiven. Maybe the only real immersion breaker is Ellie's AI sometimes runs right into enemies, but it doesn't trigger any sort of response from them. But this is just a small hiccup and pretty much just looks weird. It really doesn't take much else away from the game. The story pulls you in wonderfully, and the game is a master at having attention to detail. I mentioned this briefly in my first video, but the small things it does to make things seem real go a long way, including the fact that the fungus cordyceps that turns people into zombies is a real thing here on planet Earth that affects ants and makes them behave not unlike the creatures from The Last of Us. Also, small moments of dialogue, such as the optional high-five scene, plus the multitude of things that Ellie says if you stay still for too long or point a gun at her, are welcome additions.
I'm super bored.
And perhaps the best example of attention to detail is how, in one scene, Sam tries to take a toy with him, but Henry refuses, and in a later scene it turns out Ellie grabbed the toy herself and gave it to Sam later in the game. The crazy thing about this is that in the game you can actually see Sam put the toy down, and as long as you're looking at Ellie or it, Ellie doesn't make a move for it. But once you turn away, if you turn back, you'll see Ellie put something in her bag, and all of a sudden the toy isn't there anymore. It's these tiny things that slowly but steadily elevate the status of The Last of Us and show us just how incredibly detailed games like this can be. While the game's plot and approach isn't insanely innovative on its own like Shadow of the Colossus may have been, it perfects and tweaks the formula and genre to near perfection, blowing most zombie games way out of the water, while also setting a bar for story-based games and emotional impact in gaming. It improved and invented everywhere it had to, and while it isn't the same type of innovation as Shadow of the Colossus, it's quite innovative in its own right. Gameplay in this game is, in my opinion, totally underrated. It's extremely tight and a blast to play. It's simplistic done right. There's a bit of crafting and split-second decision making on whether you need to play it safe and bandage yourself up, or maybe add some more firepower to take out a large group, since a Molotov cocktail or a Band-Aid actually involve some of the same materials which are scattered around sparsely. Gameplay is slow and methodic, and it really works here. You need to be careful because in a full-scale battle, especially with some enemy types, you can totally get screwed over. Danger is always imminent, and you need to be both smart and skilled to progress. Joel doesn't run too fast or jump too high for a normal human being, unlike his younger Naughty Dog cousin Nathan Drake, and it makes the world even more grounded through its gameplay. Guns feel amazing and ammo is scarce, especially in the higher difficulties, and it makes you think really hard before letting loose every single bullet. Up-close combat is brutal and human. You feel strong but simultaneously not overpowered, even though realistically enemies don't land too many punches on you. Slower platforming parts help with pacing, and faster and more intense parts get your heart pumping. It's amazing third-person combat that isn't mindless but also isn't over-strategic, and it really makes you feel like you are desperate, you do have to be careful, and you can survive, but you have to make the right decisions without also feeling way too overwhelming, and it makes it really accessible to a lot of different type of people. There aren't too many enemy types, but because this isn't something like Doom or Shadow Warrior, where you just need to mow down enemies and always want new varieties to take down, that isn't too much of a problem. Humans are smarter but easier to take down, runners are fast and unrelenting but not overwhelming when on their own, clickers are powerful but steadily slower and easier to sneak past. Bloaters, while not appearing too often, do seem like real challenges in this world instead of falling into, oh look, it's a video game boss, and that helps with its sense of realism. Everything has a role, everything feels nice, and all around it's a wonderful gameplay experience. Music is incredible and matches the tone of the game by being both somber and yet not hopeless, and the art design is gorgeous. This game looks incredible in everything it does, from character models to animations to environments and so on. It's just wonderful to look at. So if I had to make a call, obviously personally I kind of have to give it to The Last of Us because I kind of gave away that was one of my favorite games of all time. But I guess when things get to this quality, it's more about personal preference than a clear-cut winner. However, if I was trying to decide the winner objectively speaking, I'd say the story aspect has to go to The Last of Us, innovation to Shadow of the Colossus, and immersion, music, art, and gameplay all coming down to the wire, but the overall edge being given to The Last of Us. And that really is as objective as I can get when the two games are this close. But I want to hear what you guys think, so comment below which game you think is the better of the two, and stay tuned for the next video, which is going to add Nintendo's very own Breath of the Wild into the mix. Until then, this has been AAA, signing off.